So if I were a developer learning about ARIO for the first time,
We recently asked ARIO infrastructure architect David Whittington to give us 9 reasons to start running a gateway today. Number 9, ARIO empowers developers with independence.
I think the things I would want to hear about is basically the independence it enables. You can run your own gateway that can serve your users. If you run your own gateway, then you can see what the queries are doing. You can understand what's happening underneath a lot more, and that will help you build a better application.
ARIO gives developers more control.
There was only one Arweave.net, and even now we have a couple options. Some of them are ARIO based, and there's just one gateway, and that's clearly not something like me as a person coming into it with a background in enterprise applications, things like that. There's no way a certain set of businesses can build on that, because they'll look at that and be like, I cannot base my business on this thing where I have absolutely no control over it. So that seemed like a way higher priority in my mind to fix that problem and give people some infrastructure they can build on.
Number 7, ARIO makes the Arweave ecosystem more robust.
We're in a position now where you really could keep going in a lot of ways. And there's lots of gateways out there. Now we have these other access points. And even if they're not running at the same scale that Arweave.net is, that's another way you can get to the same data. I think it's made a substantive difference in just people's ability to access data.
Number 6, ARIO aids in building tools for thought.
Links will break on you. Now, if instead you're building a knowledge graph that are based on links to data, you're in a much better position, right? Because if you have a copy of the data, no one can break the link. You can start to build larger scale, longer lived knowledge graphs that don't rely as much on trusting the people running the servers, because you've really decoupled the location of the data from the servers. Arweave does that. Like the core primitive, you can start to think about the applications you might want to build, and you can start to play with it on a small scale. So if you just publish to Arweave and link to things on Arweave, you're already in a better position of having addressed the data.
Number 5, ARIO and the semantic web are closely related.
Conceptually, all this stuff is related to semantic web, because the semantic web is this idea that we're going to expose data on the internet as a sort of a first-class thing and have these indexers that traverse it and can query it. The semantic web was trying to formalize some of that more so that there was more schema around the data. And one of the reasons it didn't take hold initially is just because the mutability of the existing internet. So if instead you link to data as opposed to locations, same thing, there's just fewer places that can break.
Number 4, ARIO embodies the crypto ethos.
There's this crypto ethos of you run your own node. Bitcoiners are really good about this. Like lots of Bitcoiners, they run their own Bitcoin node, even though they're not necessarily mining. They just have a copy. Don't rely on someone else's gateway if you don't have to. Run your own gateway. That gives you way more agency and autonomy. So that's really the core of it. It's like we want to give people agency and options of how they interact with the system. Arweave gives you that for data storage and the incentives around copying data. And then ARIO is trying to fill in a missing piece of data access and how you query the data.
Number 3, optimistic indexing and caching improve speed, efficiency, and reliability.
There's optimistic indexing, and that's how fast it shows up in GraphQL. And there's optimistic caching, and both have challenges, but they're different challenges. But those are both aspects of making this really work very well for all applications.
Number 2, ARIO balances service maintenance with efforts to advance network decentralization.
I know that the optimistic indexing and like data availability limits the use cases, the peer-to-peer data exchange, and just like making sure data is robustly available in a decentralized way. You can't just perpetually grind your way to success. It's a hard problem, and sometimes that's the harder problem than the technical problems. We have to maintain Arweave.net. Arweave.net has to keep running. We have other services we have to keep running. Balancing those things is really tricky. It's like managing this tension between these services that we have to maintain and building this network, because they are in tension, right? The costs to run the central gateway, the more we get decentralized, that cost can drop, right? The more people are using other gateways, but it's still hard.
And finally, number 1, ARIO offers autonomy.
You can be independent of other gateways I think people undervalue it a little bit. Whenever there's a free service that just does what you need it to, you should be suspicious. Someone ultimately is paying for this service, and you don't want to be in a position where your business is dependent on a service that someone else is paying the bill for. It's going to provide you access to data. It's going to let you put data into the network, and it's going to index data for you. And those are like the core components. The exciting thing is you get autonomy.